I've been a therapist for the last 20 years. For the last 15, late 90s, I work with NLP. Don't use NLP as a whole, but it's a very good can opener to undo. It allows you to chunk down into things and chunk away from things. It allows you to look at things from a different perspective and get a different view on stuff. And it allows you to unlock certain aspects of your life, understanding cause and effect, action and experience, what perception projection is, how much information is coming into our internal world, how much we're actually aware of in the external world, how we distort that information based on our mind state. So it all seems to be revolved around the mind state. If we had the ability to switch our mind state into a more comfortable position, the whole world would change. So that's what I tend to work with. I tend to work with, if people come with an issue, we actually look at that and how they can change that. If we can just change the viewpoint, it changes. But give them the skills to deal with something. And it's a non-specific way of looking at the ancient teachings without going too deep. For instance, people want to have results, I think, but they haven't got the time to study Buddhism in depth. I mean, eventually they will change over time, or they may get a miraculous experience and change some part of them. We want something that we can apply now in modern day times and understand how we can make shifts in our awareness, how we can make shifts in our state of being, how we can change our internal processes to get a different result from the outside world. And a fast action resource trigger is about switching off the things that we don't want, the things that affect us, so we can actually get back into the state of being. The yogis call it a centered state of being, or a balanced and centered way of life, or living through the divine nature. But we don't really need to go that deep. I don't think we want to go that deep. I just think this is for a modern person. So if we give them the tools, they can apply it, and if they want to get into something after that, that's fine. But this is probably one of the most important steps that would allow them to make some changes now. I've worked with doctors, I've worked in prisons, I've worked with all sorts of people. I worked with a friend of mine who was an electrician who wanted to be a pop star, and he's in the second round of X Factor, which is quite funny really, because I've known the guy all my life, and he certainly wasn't into singing then, and I certainly wasn't into the things I'm into now. It takes experiences, and sometimes some of those experiences are painful, but they're the ones that make us have to change. I come from a place of having to change. Like I said, I had a successful roofing company. My life was great. I played a sport that was quite aggressive. And when I had my accident, I realised that I was doing it for everyone else. I realised the reason I was playing the sport is because I was angry about my childhood. And my journey started at that point, getting over the disability first, and then realising that not only did I have a physical disability, I sort of had a mental disability through being conditioned, through schooling, through being in care as a child. It's those scenarios that affect you later on in life. You don't have, for instance, if I go and stand in front of people and talk, I still get a phobic response. I still get that uncomfortableness, but I teach how to control that state. And when I'm doing it comfortably, it's far different than when I'm doing it consciously, if that makes sense. So it's about maintaining your state in most situations so you can get a better outcome. I think if you come away from the detail of the majority of the ancient teachings or religions, then the information's already woven within all that. And because we're a society that has come from that, it's woven within all of us, to a point where it's not about learning anything new. We do these things already. It's about slowing things down to the point. If you're doing something on a regular basis that you don't want to do, if you slow it down to a point, you realise you have to do things in a specific order. I look at that like a recipe to a cake. If you get a cake that you don't like, or your grandma brings you a cake round every week and it's got cherries in it and you don't like cherries, what do? Grin and say thank you very much and take the cake? Or do you explain to her in a nice way that it would be a better cake if it didn't have the cherries in? So it's about looking at the recipe of what you do, how to change what you do into something more suitable. And there's lots of things out there that we want to believe in, but I get a person to take a medium-sized problem, not the biggest, not the smallest. If there's some deep-rooted issues, then you need to do something like timeline therapy or go off to somebody that can resolve those for you. We're talking about medium-sized problems. And if you run it through this process, which is just 5 things that we can do now, and their choices, each one of those things, we actually get a different outcome. That's where your belief comes from. If you do it on a regular basis and you get a different outcome, you start to believe in it. And if you do it on a regular basis and you get better results, you start to accept it. And the moment that you accept it, you can actually let go of it because you've learnt yourself a new way. And if you look at neuroscience, things like Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about pattern interrupts. Well, that's what a fast action resource trigger is. It interrupts the pattern. If you interrupt the pattern on a regular basis, then the interrupt becomes a part of the pattern. And behind that, if you get something better than what you used to get, then it doesn't take long for us to learn. If you look at your physiology, you know that a depressed person has a certain physiology. If you look at your breathing, an anxious person has a certain type of breathing. It's the masculine, it's the yang, it's the fire breath. It brings up the aggressor in us. We can tone that down. Also, the way our eyes are. If you look at a depressed person, they look down to the left or to the right, depending on whether they're normally organised or not. And they pick up what they're saying to themselves, they check it with the feelings, they go back and they check it, and yes, they make themselves feel worse because they're giving themselves a bad time, hitting themselves on the head with a big stick, so to speak. And there's also relaxing the jaw, which is very important. I teach that through meditation. We put the tip of your tongue behind the top front teeth, and it just separates the jaw slightly, takes away from this. So the four things is the physiology, the breathing, look up, relax your jaw, are four things that are separate. Although they're not separate, they are separate because we're trying them new. We've also got anchors. We talk about positive anchors. Fast action resource trigger is an anchor, a button, something somebody says, a way somebody looks at you, a smell. We all have these situations where something gets us fired off. If I smell Palmer Violet Sweets, I think of me nana. If I smell cigars, I think about Christmas. If we hear the first lines of a jingle that we haven't heard for years, we sing the rest of it in our mind. These are anchors and associations. So with them in mind, these 5 things are all separate. If we do them with volition, they all start to join up if we do them on a regular basis. So in the end, all you have to do is the anchor. It's the anchor that triggers you off. And once you get a response from that, then eventually you won't have to do the anchor. People want to ride a horse, they've had a bad experience on a horse, they're going for an interview, they've just lost the job, they're falling out with a girlfriend. Anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. We look at the feelings within us, and I think most of the listeners have probably heard that the feelings are a feedback mechanism. If it's an uncomfortable feeling, then you're effect of something. If it's a comfortable feeling, then you're in alignment with what you want. We talk about the art of allowing more than the secret law of attraction, because there's people out there that still haven't got the Ferrari yet, and it's because of the constant drone of what we're thinking. It's like living next door to a railway track. The stress becomes familiar. So you don't hear the trains after a while, yet your friends come around and go, oh, how can you live with that? It's simple, you've got used to it. And it's about toning that down, being aware of it, doing some meditation, doing some visual exercises, whatever fits the person. If a person isn't a spiritual person, we can talk about visualization techniques. It doesn't necessarily need to be spiritual. It can be taught in a non-spiritual way. Although when you look at it from another point of view, cause and effect is action and experience. Perception is projection, results, reasons. You can talk of it as karma if you want to. Yeah, it's different for every person. Although we run them through the fast action resource trigger, they go away. If I was working with somebody it takes approximately 8 hours for them to get some kind of result or a major result. I don't want to be, but we get good results. Now, the first 2 hours, I teach them what they need to do. They go out for a week and they come back, and I want them to tell me what doesn't work for them, because it does work. It works for the majority of people. If it doesn't work, then there's a reason why it doesn't work, and we need to look at the reasons why. It's just a limiting belief. And that's why I say I'm not interested in what you accept. I want to know what you can't accept, what you don't like, what doesn't work for you. I want them to tell me what that is, because the least we can do is reframe it to a point where they have an understanding. They may not have to believe it yet, but in time, if they practice what I'm asking them to do, they will get a result and the belief will come. Everybody has a choice. They can change any time they choose to, but we've got to have an experience of having to. And that's usually quite a painful one. It was for me.